As followers of Jesus in the midst of another polarizing election season, we don't have the choice to walk away from our responsibility to change broken policies that are breaking our neighbors, or to end relationships with our family and friends who might think differently than we do.
That's why this season of the Everyday Peacemaking podcast is exploring how we are to engage politics as citizens of the Kingdom of God and the United States. It's going to be hard and messy, but it's holy work, and we're here for it all. Thanks for joining us for Peace in Politics, becoming everyday peacemakers in and outside of the voting booth. Oh boy, this is a fun conversation. Diana is electric in all the ways that invite us to a better way to be human. She's accessible and practical and also very challenging. And so this combo, I feel like, is one that's going to really equip us as everyday peacemakers with tangible tools. Like, we can't scoot around this one with some like mental jujitsu. She's calling us onto the streets.
Yes, but she has that quality about her that's very much like, come alongside me. Like, she is very much like a companion. It's not like she speaks with authority, but she speaks with almost like an auntie energy. Yeah. Like, I've lived this, I've been here, like, listen to me, but that's also right. Like, do this alongside me. And she even says something to that effect towards the end of like, you know, we can't just tell people, like, send an article to them and like, you should do this. Like, they actually want to see you doing it and they want to be invited into doing it. And from that, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so if I am volunteering at this home that I know that cares for women who are in crisis pregnancies, like, I should volunteer, but I could also invite people to come with me instead of just saying, here's how I'm responding to Roe v. Wade being overturned. I could say, or here's how you should respond. I could say, here's how I'm responding. Come alongside me. And that feels like Jesus, you know?
That's right. Yeah, she has a handout for us and is wanting to walk with us. And for you guys listening in, I mean, to have the opportunity to listen to someone who grew up with a faith and politics very integrated. I mean, she said things like she grew up in a space where she understood to serve country is to serve God. And that led her into the military, and her story in the military and her conversion there is amazing. We're going to get into that as well in our time with Diana. So enjoy the interview. Hello, Everyday Peacemaking podcast listeners. There's two things with Global Immersion we wanted to let you know about. First, this podcast would not be happening if it wasn't for our Embers community. This is a collective of folks from all across the country and the world who give money every single month to help fund our everyday peacemaking resources, like our monthly periodical called The Monthly Peace, our daily contemplative prayers, webinars, and this podcast. So, if you'd like to join this community of funders for $5 a month or $500 a month, we would be thrilled. You can follow the link in the show notes or go to our website, globalimmerse.org, to jump in on that. Second, we're about to open up applications for our 2023 leadership cohorts. These cohorts are designed for faith leaders who want to go on a journey of discovery in the intimate company of peers and trusted guides. We want to do the slow, hard work that leads to healing and renewed vision for who you are and I am, and how we will collectively lead restoratively in the church of the future. These cohorts include in-person retreats, online learning, coaching, and immersive experiences. One, the Journey of Hope cohort, culminates in a trip to Northern Ireland to learn from other peacemakers in that global context, and the other, Journey Home, culminates with a pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago, where we seek to confront the conflict within ourselves that inhibit our ability to lead towards equity and justice and peace. So, space is very limited. Jump on it, and you can get more information and apply in the show notes or go to globalimmerse.org/leaders.
Well, hello, guests. We're so excited because we have Diana Oestreich with us. Diana is my friend. Well, she's our friend, but I feel like she's a little closer friend to me because she's here in Minnesota with me. She's a fellow peacemaker who is once a soldier and turned convicted and convinced peacemaker. And she's the author of Waging Peace. You're going to love Diana's story of how she followed God's call to love her enemies on the battlefield of Iraq. And she is a peacemaker who will definitely help us understand kind of the thrall of Christian nationalism, how she kind of got wrapped up in that, and how Christ's call to peacemaking invited her into a kingdom way of thinking. And yeah, so welcome, Diana. I'm so glad that you are here chatting with us about peace and politics.
Man, thank you so much for being here. I honestly kind of love it. I think this is really where we get to show up as our full selves and put love on display. So I know politics kind of makes people's neck gets a little tight, maybe get a little nervous, but I'm so glad to be here and that you guys are bringing us all into this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. So to kind of ground us in this conversation, we have just 3 definitions or assumptions that we're working with as we're chatting. So Diana, when we talk about peace, we're talking about like the holistic repair of relationships. So interpersonal, interpersonal, systemic. We are talking about actual peacemaking. So it's that work of moving into conflict with the tools that we need to heal and transform. We're not interested in holding the status quo. We want to be disruptors for the sake of peace, disruptors for shalom. And then when we talk about politics, we're not talking about like partisan arguing. We're not talking about like choosing a side and firing at one another. We're talking about the ordering of our society. Like, how are we living together? What's the shared convictions that we have for us to move forward together? So those are kind of the 3 working assumptions that we have. And so with all of that in mind, I'm really curious. The past few years have been really challenging, and you're someone who has served in the military, so you have a unique perspective on some of the things that we have been talking about. Like I mentioned, like Christian nationalism. Tell us a little bit of your story. How did you join the military? What did it mean for you to be serving in the military for America? Tell us a little bit about how you entered into this.
So I grew up in a cute little country Baptist church, small town, northern Minnesota. And there's probably, the same 60 or 70 people in the pews. And I was a 3rd generation Army veteran. So this was pretty, this was a cultural thing, I think, and so there's really no questions asked, and ultimately, to serve my country was to serve God. And there really wasn't any difference in that. And I think that, so ultimately, I think that I was just born and raised into this mindset by people who, loved me and patted me on the back and taught me to love Jesus and, gave me some juicy fruit gum after the service and baptized me. And I grew up in this way of thinking that really said, that to ultimately take a life was to take a life for God. If I was taking a life for my country, then I was really taking a life for God. That my faith in my country, even so far as to take a life for it, was really taking a life for God. And these things were just so intertwined and connected, as connected as that flag was at the front of the church, that to the left, there was the American flag, and to the right, there was the Christian flag. That these things were just things that I remember seeing before I could really remember. I was 5 years old on up. And then when I went to, I wanted to be a medical missionary, because in the Baptist tradition, if you were a lady, there was really only 2 spots for you. You could play the piano, you could marry a pastor, really, if you want to do something exciting, or you could be a missionary and go to fascinating places and preach the gospel. And so I didn't really think about like getting married. I want to do some stuff. So I definitely was going to be a missionary. I had a little sass happen in there, a little adventure. So I joined the military because my family had a lot of love, but not any money. Nobody really had gone to college in my family. So this is pre-internet. I didn't really know how to do that. So I joined the military, the Guard, in order to pay for college. But ultimately I wanted to be a medical missionary. But I did drive a VW Bug, so someone should have told me this was not gonna be a good fit.
Yeah, sounds troublesome.
I mean, someone should have said there was something peacenik happening inside that girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody had that conversation with me.
So it's so fascinating because I'm curious because as a woman in that context, in like that Christian nationalism type of context, you heard this invitation to fight for God and country, and you chose to go into the military to pay for school. So like and you were still honored within that context. Like your church still honored and sent you out, even as did you being a woman in the military, how was that? How did that feel for you?
Well, both my mother and my father had been in the military. And so, though it was their choice, that they didn't really tell me what it was going to be like, because the military was segregated at that time. Like my mother, women were not allowed in the Army. My mother was not allowed in the military. So me joining the military, I was one of the first women who was part of an integrated basic training. And so there is a lot of harm that happens to women, and a lot of physical harm and a lot of sexual assault. Because if you don't want women to be in part of your army, you do anything to them to make them leave.
So that's a little bit of, okay, keep going.
Well, I mean, as you can tell, there's a lot of disconnects here.
Yeah.
A lot of disconnects. Like, why would a lot of things be okay that really weren't okay? But, I was 17 when I signed up, and I wanted to go to college, and this is how I thought I could do it. Fast forward, I was done with college. I was pretty much done with my enlistment, and then 9/11 happened. And I ended up getting deployed to the Iraq War. And that is really where all my beliefs that I had really been handed to me and that I really held to be really true. And I never met a Democrat till I was like in basic training.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
And here's the thing, I don't think many of us meet different kinds of people than the culture that we're handed until we leave home and leave our bubbles. And basic training was really the place that I met America. Really beautiful place to actually meet America. It was really, really amazing. So I get deployed, and all of a sudden I believe A, B, C, and D that my fundamentalist faith taught me. But all of a sudden I'm in a place where these beliefs are going to tell me that I need to take a life. And everything in me knows that even though I believe these things and I signed up to do these things and I have to do these things, something in me is pushing back. And I hear this voice of God say, but I love them, Diana. I love them too. And I knew it. And so I just took the bullets out of my weapon and decided that no matter what would happen to me, military prison, retribution from my fellow soldiers, I didn't care what happened. Like, I would never take a life between me and God. And that's where my allegiance changed. And I truly believe, I call that my desert baptism, because that's the first time I really became a citizen of the kingdom of heaven first and my country second. That's when I became fully alive. And that's when I became a peacemaker. And I think that changed my life. I really think like God saved my life from myself.
Mm.
And so that's why I really believe that right now, people are not good people and bad people. We're really just been handed a whole set of beliefs by people that love us. And the way we move forward is just by believing the best in each other and asking each other better questions and giving each other better invitations. Like, we can't get stuck on where we're at. We've all been given a whole set of things, but we got to choose where we're going to be a year from now and 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So how has your experience, that desert baptism, and now you're firmly committed to living as a peacemaker, but we don't live in very peaceful times when it comes to politics. It feels so contentious. And how has your service and your baptism and now your leadership in the space, how has that influenced the way you engage with politics?
Well, one, it's changed. One, I show up. So I'm committed. And because I come from peacemaking, from war making, I'm really practical. Like, I don't really get into touchy-feely stuff. And sure, you guys are both pastors and really smart and know theology, but like, I'm just straight like violence. So I'm like, hey, I'm taught to keep people alive. So I think that violence is happening in our community. And I'm also a nurse, and I was a hospice and a cancer nurse. So death and violence is happening. So I really want to show up and stop violence. So kids who can't eat, that's violence. And I think that sexual assault is violence. And I know that so I really think like there are practical ways that we got to show up in our community. And Dr. Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's wife, said starving a kid is violence. Kids not getting educated is violence. And so I'm just super practical. I'm like, man, I'm going to show up and make sure that our communities, people who agree with me and people who don't, I don't care. But I think that all of our kids really, really deserve to grow up in a community where all of us are making sure that violence isn't harming them. And if we can do that, we are going to win each other. Because if you care for my kid, I don't care if I like you, I will love you. If you go to bat for my kid, I will care for you forever. Like, I think this is how we start to rebuild our bridges, is that we show up and make sure, like, I can be happy that my kid has dinner tonight, but I cannot rest or have joy until I know every kid in my city has dinner tonight. And so, so my family really has committed to showing up for my unsheltered neighbors. And so that's just really practical, and it works, and we can work for it. And so I think we don't need any more hashtag warriors, but we need people to show up and say, like, things aren't okay, but we all want things to be better. And if we each commit to something, 9 times out of 10, all of us want things to be a little better. And we don't have to agree on 27 things to say, I think we do want our schools to be a little bit safer. How are we going to do this? Let's just take like one thing. We don't have to do 10 things together, but we do want our kids to be a little bit safer this year.
When you, I have a bunch more questions about your story, and we can come back to that. But since we're talking about the political side of things and the systems change, seeing it on a systemic level, you were in the military, you were proximate with those soldiers who, many of whom I'm sure were impacted by experiences in war, whether it's physical or mental. As we're in the midterm season now, we're talking about policy change. For you as a vet, do you go to the voting booth with like kingdom values in mind that actually can benefit that community you were part of?
Yeah.
And how do you help us think about that?
So the number one thing that I am looking to do And I think that works as a veteran. And well, the number one thing I think you can do if you want to support veterans, and that I am doing, and I'm asking people to do, is to vote for universal health care, because veterans, including myself, need health care, and we are trying to get it, and we're being denied left and right. Left and right. And the average age of a veteran who was deployed to the post 9/11 wars of Afghanistan and Iraq is only 37. So if veterans could just get healthcare when they need it, and they stopped having to be going through the hoops and getting denied for every little thing. And let me tell you, it is really tough. Yeah. And if their families and their kids could just get healthcare, it would take away so much of the stress. And already having PTSD or having all of these things happen makes it doubly hard to navigate life. So if them and their families could just get healthcare when they needed it, I'm telling you, it would help so much. So it is dignifying to just get healthcare when you need it, and not to have to jump through these hoops and then get denied. And then as you get older, the next thing happens, and then you have to do it again. It is really, really harmful how that system is working. Yeah. And if you want to help mental health people, work for universal health care. That's really helpful. If you want to help kids, work for universal health care. And I also think that I'm a third generation Army veteran, and I'm working that my kids do not go to a war, because so far I'm the third generation to go. Wow. And so the United States has had 17 years of peace in our 250-year history, roughly. Jeez. And so if we can increase the living standard and preempt the next war because people are doing okay, that they don't have to sign up, that will be peace to me. Like, I really want to interrupt my family's legacy of having every generation go to a war, because it affects them. And being parented, I know it affects my kids. I know myself having PTSD is not the easiest on my sons. And I know me being raised by my two parents was not the easiest by them being in the military. So when I go to the polls and when I talk to people, I'm not going to get hung up on what party you're registered for. I'm going to ask you, what are you working for? What are you wanting to happen in your community? Because we have to be good ancestors, and you have to be able to tell your kids what you showed up for. And if you showed up for nothing but yourself, that in itself is a receipt. And I am unwilling to tell my kids that I didn't invest in making sure that my neighbors in my community had shelter when they hit a rough time, or they had medicine when they needed it. Like, this is our chance to put love on display when we go to the polls. And I'm excited about it. Like, people need hope. And this is the time we show up and be courageous with our love.
So thank you for saying that piece about, so my a little bit about my story is that my dad was a Marine for 20 years, and he left when I was born. So because he didn't, super patriarchal. He had a son before me, but when he found out that my mom was having a daughter, he was like, I don't want to be in the military and have a daughter. I want to be with my daughter. So anyway, but my dad has really, really bad PTSD that because he did 2 tours in Vietnam, and it has affected my siblings and I talk about like how dad's time with the Marines has so deeply affected our family in every single angle. And it's like, it's so difficult to talk to him about it, because I feel like with vets, or at least with my dad, there's this shame of it. And especially my dad was a Black man in the Marines, and so he had to work extra hard. He was a master gunnery sergeant, so he had to work extra hard for respect. And so like he didn't want to acknowledge that like this was hard and traumatizing, and like it has really, like, when I hear you say like you want to make sure that the next generation, that you're raising the next, protecting the next generation from having to go to war, I don't just hear you say like, oh, I'm against war because I think it's bad to kill people. Or I don't just hear you say that. I hear you say, I'm trying to protect the next generation from experiencing trauma, because we here on stateside are not providing the kind of care or standard of living. Because my dad went into the military for school, his dad went into the military for school, my brother went into the military for school. He told me directly, like, I don't want you to go into the military for school for that exact reason. So it's real. And I just want to say thank you for bringing that human aspect to this conversation.
Yeah.
It's not just glory and guns and God bless America. There's a lot of ugliness on the underside of it. So thank you.
Yeah.
John, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah. Well, just you sharing that just brought up the memory of standing outside my front door with my mom and two sisters as we waved goodbye to my dad when he was during the first Gulf War. He was gone for a year, and because he was in the Army for like 30 years. And even that memory is seared. And then that year of sleeping around my mom's bed, all of us, because we were like a family without dad for a year, and just all the uncertainty around that. So you're telling that, Oshita just brought that up for me as well. But man, it doesn't impact all of us. Maybe we should talk about that more. Holy smokes. And that's not even talking about the killing someone, Diana, like you mentioned, pulling those bullets out of the gun. Your story is so compelling to me. My question here is, you chose to walk away from a vocation that your upbringing said was synonymous with being faithful to God. To love country was to love God. To kill for country was to kill for God. You disarmed your weapon and walked away. What was that like for you in your own community? Because your sense of identity is shaped by your community, and now you're saying to your community, I don't believe in that. And I'm just curious, like, how was that? And did you, like, were fingers being pointed at you? Was shame being leveraged? Invite us into that.
Well, being really honest, I think when I did it, it was just survivability. When you look at something, you do what you need to do to survive. And I think in God's, like, we all get a choice, and I think for me to survive, it was saying yes to life and not death. Like, I couldn't be part of the kingdom of death and live. But coming out of that, it's been a real lonely 20 years.
Yeah.
Because allegiance is also required of us. And I think that is the thrum underneath all of what we're seeing. People require allegiance or they will take the pound of flesh. That is why people are staying in these political camps, because it's allegiance. And I think once you won't give it to them, you don't belong. And there are very few churches that I can stand in and say out loud, I will not kill for this country and be welcomed in. And that is my pound of flesh. And that is because my allegiance is to the kingdom of life.
Yeah.
And love. And it's lonely. And I won't ever be welcome, because some people can't hold two things that says you can disagree with me and I can still love you. Like, they just can't. And there are limits to humans' ability to love. And that's why I believe in this bigness of God, that there's something beyond humans, that God can love us in like our littleness and our bigness. Because when you won't kill for somebody, when you won't save them and everybody else second, when you're like, nope, there's not a single person that I will choose them above you, you don't belong. There's a tribalness that when you won't join that, you are dead to them.
Yeah.
And it's a lonely place. But there's also a freedom to that when you know that you know that you know that you will never harm another person, there's a freedom to live like you have never lived. And that's the thing that I've given my sons is that, like, no matter what happens or where they are free to give and never take a life. And there is something about that that makes you sleep and live in a courageous way that feels freeing that I never had when I had a weapon.
So say more about that freedom. I think I understand what you mean by that. So like when we lived in Boston, and I've written about this in my first book, when we lived in Boston, and the two brothers who were responsible for the marathon, the Boston Marathon bombing, were running around. They were fleeing the police. They fled into an adjacent neighborhood to where we lived. And so they locked down the whole community, that neighborhood, and then the neighborhood surrounding them, so they can search for those boys. And I had a moment in that night. I was up all night just praying, and I was like going through my house being like, okay, what can I grab to protect my family? Like, okay, if I grab like bug spray and I spray them in the eyes, okay, then what do I do next? Do I kick them? I was like going through it all in my mind. And then every scenario, I was like, either I horribly hurt this person and I have to deal with this, with the shame and the trauma of that, or I escalate the violence and then worse things happen for me and my family. And I sensed the spirit say to me, why do you need anything, Oshita? And at that moment, I was like, if they come to my door and if they are violent, like I will do my best to disarm. I will not escalate. So I'll put down whatever things I wanted to have to protect myself and do my best to be like, do you need water? So I just kind of went through all of the sort of like humanizing things I could possibly do that night. And I felt like that was that was the freedom for me of like, you know what, I am now free to love them and look at them as people and not live in the fear. So my love is greater than my fear. So so when you say that, that's what that means for me. But I want to hear more from you by what you mean when you say there's freedom, like you're set free.
Well, that's really incredible what you did. Because I think like in a war, it's just different because when you can like be killed by lunch, there's just this thing where like there's a freedom that just said, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Like, I don't know what will come at me, but I get to decide how I will respond. And there is a freedom in that decision. Because otherwise, like, it's so false that we can manage what life gives us. Like, and also being a cancer and a hospice nurse, it's like, you know what? We don't get to decide what life gives us. Like, that's just false. We can't be smart enough. We can't protect our kids. Like, the only thing we get to do is we get to show up today and decide how we're going to love and what that is going to look like. And so I think just choosing to lay down my violence and say, like, I'm not going to do that. That was just my decision to follow Jesus in that thing. Because there's like, Jesus had not one act of violence in him. Like, he went through the whole world. And I felt like that was just the freedom. That was really different than what I grew up with. My like growing up was like, you gotta like hit first before someone hits you, shoot first, ask questions later, like that whole mentality. And I'm like that. So I think just deciding not to do that gave me the freedom to decide how I was going to show up. And there was a piece in that just changed my trajectory. And I kind of summed it up with like, I had this experience with this woman, this Iraqi grandma in the war, and she just really like she kind of exemplified this whole idea that like you can either go through life with this posture of protecting yourself, of acting like someone's always going to take something from you, or you could go through life believing that God gave you something extravagant to give. And it's kind of like that verse that talks about like the lens with your eye. Like if you have light in your eye, that's how you're going to see everything. And if your eyes are dark, you're always just going to see darkness.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of like had this transformational thing about violence. That violence was the darkness, but God had showed me like, nope, I'm going to walk through life saying I got something extravagant to give. And so that's kind of the way that I think we can show up with politics, because politics is just us showing up in our communities saying everybody, and kind of my definition, my working short term of like peace is that everybody gets a seat at the table and everybody gets to have what they need to thrive. So if I don't get to like vote anybody off the island, then I have to include everybody gets a seat at the table and everybody gets to have what they need to thrive. So everybody's kids matter, whether you're sheltered or unsheltered, addicted or not addicted, old or young, like everybody's here, Republican, Democrat, independent. There's always this cannabis write-in group. Have you noticed that on all the stuff? I'm like, guys, I didn't know this is such like a big deal to you, but I guess you're loud and proud. Let's
do it. Okay.
So just making sure that as a village and as a community, like everybody gets what they need, and showing up and saying love let's put our love in public.
Yeah.
Like, let's not leave a single kid behind. So if you really need your kid to go to private school because they have needs, then make sure that you're putting your money into some other kid getting to have the same services. Like we cannot leave anybody's kid behind. If your kid loves soccer, make sure that you're making sure a kid who doesn't have the money gets to play soccer too. Like it's the both and. We don't run ahead and take without making sure we're bringing everybody with us, because that is community.
But that sounds like what you are describing sounds so good, but it sounds like something that we have to bit by bit, relationally, in conversation with the people around us, convince them of that, especially for those who they hear what you're saying and they're like, but you didn't work hard enough to be able to afford your kid to go into a private school. And I did. So like my kids should be able to go into a private school because I worked hard enough. So I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that we need to invite everybody into this picture, this identity or this call into usness. But I think that starts us voting in such a way that we create a village. That starts with us having conversations with people in our real lives about the problems and the policies that we want to see, the problems that we see and the policies we want to see enact, which means we have to do this work on a relational level. Like we have to cast this vision across coffee tables and dining room tables on long walks. So like, how do you engage with conversations with people who don't share that same like Cornel West, quote of justice is what love looks like in public? How do you do that relationally with people who disagree with you and say,
so I kind of, my like little short thing is my definition of like waging peace is activating justice and instigating joy by committing small acts of courage. So the activating justice part is like by actually doing the voting, doing the work, and the instigating joy is bringing people with. And that small acts of courage, that's what you're talking about right there. That acts of courage is when you actually like have that conversation with that person who definitely doesn't believe the same thing. And definitely you can tell it's going to make them uncomfortable when you're like, oh, so what else are you doing then? It's cool. Because in my city, there's all these like private schools, and it's like, well, that's nice that public schools don't work for your child because they need special things. But like, isn't that leaving out everybody else's kids? There's probably 27 other kids who have reading issues and could really use that small class size and personal attention that your child is getting.
Yeah.
So one, I think we got to like be doing it. Like we have to be doing it. So when you have that conversation with a person, you're not giving them an article that you read, you're giving them a personal experience that says, hey, when I was volunteering I volunteer at this place called Olive Branch, and I was hanging out with this family. She said, this is how it worked for her. Because I really do believe in the higher good in people. So when they start to hear your experiences with this family who is unsheltered because A, B, C, and D, and it's totally not what they were thinking about, you're sharing real experiences in our home community and not an article that you read. So I think, and that changes people, because and even like, there was a white supremacist group that was recruiting in our city, and I went around and put up some posters. I asked some local businesses, and when I walked in and said, "Oh, hey, will you put this up?" They're like, "What do you mean that happened here?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it happened." They're like, "What do you mean, in our town?" And I'm like, "Yes, in our town, in the park. They're recruiting." They're like, "I can't believe that." Here, we'll put up, and this is in the local hardware store, which I wasn't so sure they would put up this poster. So I think when we engage in things and then have the conversation, we're giving people real experiences, and that changes people, because they couldn't say, "Oh, that's not a real news article," or "that happened way across the country. That only happens in big cities." I was giving them a real experience, and they know me, so they know Diana, who buys pet things from their hardware store every other Saturday. You know what I mean? So I think if we do this work and are actually invested in the work in our city, then when we have the conversation, those actual experiences are going to change them.
Go ahead, John.
I just I'm so compelled by that, because what that requires is a level of proximity with those that may or may not think differently than us. And I think it's easy in today's culture and society to be like, mic drop, social media, fingers pointing at people you disagree with. And what that creates, it seems, is this economy of shame. And is anything I've learned from my therapist, shame doesn't do any good. Like, it doesn't change hearts or minds. What people need are invitations to a better way. And so I guess I'm curious, is in this, I know we're wrapping up here, but when you think about your hometown, you think about the church you grew up in, you described earlier, this community that you're still to some degree connected with, what does it look like for us to invite people to not just point and say you're wrong with how you think, but to invite people into a community that's actually living out an alternative that's better? Because if we don't give it a community or something better, then I think we just kind of leave people hanging that might think differently than us.
Well, I would never underestimate the power of just doing it yourself. Like, what I hear oftentimes in my own head and other people is they always think that they don't matter. They're like, "Oh, well, that's too small and I don't matter." And then sometimes I get these little messages where people are like, "Man, Diana, that's cool," or "I see you." I actually got a message from a friend from Haiti, and I've been volunteering there off and on since the earthquake. And I was like, and she was like, "Hey girl, I see you. You're doing good stuff." And I was like, "What?" Because Haiti is really tough in the last couple of years. Like, even for them historically, it is so hard. If you have friends in Haiti, like, pray for them and send them money. It is so tough right now. So I think that, like, never underestimate the fact that you just showing up yourself is going to be the new community, and it is going to give people hope and an example. So do it yourself, and then invite someone else to come with you, because nobody can start doing something on their own or without seeing somebody else do it. It doesn't have to be big, but I think we all are waiting for some magical thing, and it's us. Like, just starting. Like, I just started volunteering at this place, and I realized it's been 4 years. And in my head, I'm like, "Oh, I just started." But it was my birthday 4 years ago, and I was super, like, nervous about it, and I felt really awkward and stupid. It was 4 years ago. What if I had just thought, "Oh, just little old me." 4 years, you know?
So I feel like there's so much I want to learn from you. Where can we continue following you and hearing about how you are? We talked about this a little bit before in our warm up, and we were getting ready to begin recording. I look at you, Diana, and I think you are a practitioner of peacemaking. And so I would love to encourage anyone that I meet to continue following you. So where can we find you online? And then after you answer that, I would love for you to share with us what's giving you hope right now. Like, you talked a little bit about like the hardware store, and that's surprising. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, hang that up. Like that would be like a glimmer of hope for me. But like, what are some other things that are giving you hope in the midst of this midterm election season? So where can we find you? What's giving you hope?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram at Diana Oestreich. But I do the Waging Peace Project. So that you can have me come, I speak, and I do it with my friend Sadia, who's a super fun, she's one of my heroes, another peacemaker, and we come anywhere and everywhere and do workshops and events and speaking, because this is everywhere, like middle schools, high schools, elementary schools, universities, everywhere, because all the stuff that has happened the last couple of years, this is how we put our stake in the sand and say this year is going to be better. And it is going to be better. But we got to talk about it, and we got to decide how we want to show up together differently. And that's at my website, dianaoestreich.com. It's called the Waging Peace Project. So bump on over there, get on my email list, and you can get the first chapter of my book for free on my website as a little thank you.
It's a great book, by the way, everyone listening in.
John endorsed.
So good.
You bet. So
shoot
good.
It too. So what's given me a big time amount of hope is I just did a keynote speech at a local college, and I'm telling you that people are ready for this year to be different. And I talked about the power of belonging, based a lot about my basic training experience, because basic training was people from all across the US. And let me tell you, we wore the same uniform, but we had zero uniformity in some of the most polarizing political things people are voting on today: abortion, gun responsibility, politics, and like LGBTQ inclusion and immigration. So I'm telling you, if we could like live together, work together, put our lives in each other's hands, and have zero uniformity in some of this stuff, and we all had a lot of life baggage, came from different places, different education, and we could like achieve and perform together and have high morale, then I know we can rebuild across all of these lines of difference when we choose to belong to each other. And we don't have to fundamentally change who we are, but we can make space to belong to each other. And we need it for our kids going to school together. We need it on our college campuses, because if we don't, there will be extremism. And I believe we can disrupt the violence before it happens. So that's what I'm hyped about. Like when I gave this talk, I'm like, I'm excited about this year. Like, I think it's going to be different. So I'm excited to do this talk, and I'm excited because 9/11 is coming. And I also think that we can talk about how we can remember that with belonging and changing the narrative on that. So I don't know. I'm kind of excited about this year. Since I did that talk with these teachers, I'm just kind of hyped.
Now I'm excited.
Belonging. Yes. Love that. Well, Diana, I just adore you.
I just adore you.
Thanks
you
for
guys.
your life. We are grateful.
We
It's
are.
been a gift.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
All right. So Diana, oh my gosh.
What a woman.
I know. What a woman. What a teacher. She just lives in such an authentic way, and she's so convinced. Like I said in the intro, like she is a convinced peacemaker because she disarmed her gun and chose not to kill someone. She's so convinced, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's just impressive. And it really makes me, as somebody who has been doing this work for a long time, just kind of be a little more, I don't know, convinced myself.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm not often speechless, but after that conversation, I'm
Mm-hmm.
still processing a lot of what she said.
And a lot of people that are convinced are jerks.
Yeah.
Honestly, like if you kind of think you know things and you want to just tell other people what you know, and so they believe it. But she's not a jerk. She's convinced in this like very compelling, like, oh my gosh, I need to listen to it. She holds this authority because of her lived experience and her open heart that is really compelling and invitational, but also pretty radical. I mean, she's asked, like, it's a radical at its most, disarming her own weapon in a war zone, like that could cost her her life, but also in how we disarm ourselves from the violence in our everyday life so we can be part of God's work for peace.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Teach, we're still recording. Like 10 more minutes. Can you go upstairs? Or thank you.
God bless you.
Sorry, Kip. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think that, okay, so what I loved about our conversation with her was that she kept bringing it back to the fact that we are in community with each other. Mm-hmm. We belong to each other. I will not kill another person. Like, there is this deep other-centeredness about the way she talks about peacemaking that I think is exactly what we need as we enter into the midterm election season.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we're going to vote based on our core convictions and how we want to see our society formed, how we want to live in society. But like at the core of how we're talking about politics, it's an other-centered practice. We are voting for the sake of the usness, for the other, for the community. And I think Diana, and every aspect of her story and what she brought to us, was bringing us back to that. Like, we're doing this for each other, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And she talked about, speaking of the usness, she's calling us away from some kind of allegiance to a partisan identity or a cultural identity. Like, it's not that we don't each have our unique identities, but she said, people require allegiance, and if you don't give it to them, you won't belong. In other words, when people try to like presume your identity on you outside of our usness, then get ready to not feel like you like to be an outcast, and that hurts. And I think we need to be honest about that. Like, it's not easy to say yes to this way of life, to these convictions, to being friends across borders and boundaries where we can, because it's not going to happen the way some people want it to. And when they don't, they're going to shut you out. And so how are we showing up for each other so we have belonging here? Right. We're going to run into some pain along the way.
Yeah, like her story of even her friend from Haiti being like, I see you. I think that if any of our listeners take anything from this conversation, which you will take so much from this conversation, but I think that reminder to encourage each other, as long as it's called today, you know, that invitation from scripture to be encouragers, I think that it's really important for us to encourage each other along the way. But like, yes, you're doing this peacemaking work. This can be lonely. This can be hard. You're showing up. I think we need more of us showing up and saying, yes, I see you. I bless you in that.
Yeah. And she really commissioned us towards that at the end, when she's like, people want to see change. They're ready for something different. And it's us. Yeah. You know, and say, it's time to show up tangibly, locally, really practically, which I am really grateful for.
Yeah. So I was trying to think about a practice, like what is something that I'm going to do coming out of my conversation with Diana that like helps me kind of be aware of like my heart and also the relational piece. So like, what kind of heart am I bringing into this? My relations, how am I connecting with people? And then systemic, like I was trying to think like, is there something? And I've been reading a lot of tweets about the loan forgiveness and how a lot of people are feeling around it. I know in our conversation with Dominique Gilliard, he brought that up. But one response I heard from somebody was that we are surrounded by systems that are paid for by other people. Like we experience the life we experience because we all collectively pay for water and sewage and roads and all these things. And that made me want to enter into a practice of gratitude for the next couple days. As I move through my day, being aware of how I'm able to function so seamlessly because of the contribution of other people. So like when I get in my car, I have gas in my car because politicians have worked hard to negotiate the price of the gas, but then also like roads work because, and trucks are on those roads delivering the gas to my gas station. And then there's, like so I'm inviting everyone to just pick one part of your day, one thing that you do in your day, whether it's getting gas, filling up your sink to wash your dishes or to take a bath, go for a walk, like pick some aspect of your life if you live in America, and think about all of the different systems and people that had to work together to make that one moment for you happen. And offer gratitude to God for all the systems and the people involved, remembering that we are interconnected and that we are benefiting from the work of so many people and so many systems working as they should. So that's your practice for this week.
Beautiful. I won't turn on the sink in the same mentality the rest of the week. Thank you for that. Okay, as we say every week, we encourage you to go to the show notes and also onto the website and grab the free PDF, which has a practice guide built out of these conversations specific to this midterm season on peace and politics that talk about peacemaking from a personal level, interpersonal level, and a systemic level. So jump in and get that. We're grateful you've been with us. We leave you with this. May we be willing to disarm our weapons and our hearts to more fully display love in our world. Thanks for being with us.